Dr. Doolittle's Circus. The Push Me Pull You. This is the story of that part of Dr. Doolittle's adventures which came about through his joining and travelling with the circus. He had not planned in the beginning to follow this life for any considerable time. His intention had only been to take the Push Me Pull You out on show long enough to make sufficient money to pay the sailor back for the boat which had been borrowed and wrecked on his way to Africa. But a remark Tutu had made was true. It was not so hard for John Dolittle to become rich, for indeed he was easily satisfied where money was concerned, but it was a very different matter for him to remain rich. Dab used to say that during the years she had known him he had, to her knowledge, been quite well off 5 or 6 times, but that the more money he had, the sooner you could expect him to be poor again. Well, the point from which we are beginning then is where the Doolittle party, Jip the dog, Dab the duck, Tutu the owl, Gub the pig, the Push Me Pull You and the white mouse, had returned at last to the little house in Puddleby on the marsh after their long journey from Africa. It was a large family to find food for, and the doctor, without a penny in his pockets, had been a good deal worried over how he was going to feed it, even during the short time when they would be here before arrangements were made to join a circus. However, the thoughtful Dab had made him carry up from the ship such supplies as remained in the larder after the voyage was done. There, she said, these should last the household, with economy, for a day or two at least. Although the people in Puddleby had not yet learned of the doctor's arrival, news of his coming had already spread among the animals and the birds. All that afternoon he was kept busy bandaging, advising and physicking, while a huge motley crowd of creatures waited patiently outside the surgery door. "Ah, me, just like old times," sighed Dab. "No peace. Patients clamouring to see him morning, noon and night." By the time darkness came that night it was very chilly. Wood enough was found in the cellar to start a jolly fire in the big chimney. Round this the animals gathered after supper and pestered the doctor for a story or a chapter from one of his books. "But look here," said he, "what about the circus? If we're going to make money to pay the sailor back, we've got to be thinking of that. We haven't even found a circus to go with yet. I wonder what's the best way to set about it. They travel all over the place, you know. Let me see. Who could I ask?" "Shh," said Tutu. "Wasn't that the front doorbell ringing?" "Strange," said the doctor, getting up from his chair. "Callers already?" "Perhaps it's the old lady with rheumatism," said the white mouse as the doctor walked out into the hall. "Maybe she didn't find her Oxenthorpe doctor was so very good after all." When John Dolittle had lit the candles in the hall, he opened the front door, and there, standing on the threshold, was the cat's meat man. "Why, it's Matthew Mugg, as I'm alive," he cried. "Come in, Matthew, come in. But how did you know I was here?" "I felt it in my bones, doctor," said the cat's meat man, stumping into the hall. "Only this morning I says to my wife, 'Theodosia,' I says, 'something tells me the doctor's got back, and I'm going up to his house tonight to take a look.'" "Well, I'm glad to see you," said John Dolittle. "Let's go into the kitchen where it's warm." Although he said he had only come on the chance of finding the doctor, the cat's meat man had brought presents with him. A knuckle bone off a shoulder of mutton for Jip, a piece of cheese for the white mouse, a turnip for Gub, and a pot of flowering geraniums for the doctor. When the visitor was comfortably settled in the armchair before the fire, John Dolittle handed him the tobacco jar from the mantelpiece and told him to fill his pipe. "Are you home for a long stay now?" asked Matthew. "Well, yes and no," said the doctor. "I'd like nothing better than to enjoy a few quiet months here and get my garden to rights. It's in a shocking mess. But unfortunately I've got to make some money first." "Humph," said Matthew, puffing at his pipe. "Myself, I've been trying to do that all my life. Never was very good at it. But I've got 25 shillings saved up, if that would help you." "It's very kind of you, Matthew, very. The fact is, I need a whole lot of money. I've got to pay back some debts. But listen, I have a strange kind of new animal. A Push Me Pull You. He has 2 heads. The monkeys in Africa presented him to me after I had cured an epidemic for them. Their idea was that I should travel with him in a circus, on show, you know. Would you like to see him?" "I surely would," said the cat's meat man. "Sounds like something very new." "He's out in the garden," said the doctor. "Don't stare at him too hard. He isn't used to it yet. Gets frightfully embarrassed. Let's take a bucket of water with us and just pretend we've brought him a drink." When Matthew came back into the kitchen with the doctor, he was all smiles and enthusiasm. "Why, John Doolittle," said he, "you'll make your fortune sure as you're alive. There's never been anything seen like that since the world began. And anyway, I always thought you ought to go into the circus business. You, the only man living that knows animal language. When are you going to start?" "That's just the point. Perhaps you can help me. I'd want to be sure it was a nice circus I was going with, people I would like, you understand." Matthew Mugg bent forward and tapped the doctor on the knee with the stem of his pipe. "I know the very concern you want," said he. "Right now, over at Grimbledon, there's the nicest little circus you ever saw. Grimbledon Fair's on this week, and they'll be there till Saturday. Me and Theodosia saw 'em the first day they was on. It isn't a large circus, but it's a good one, select-like. What do you say if I take you over there tomorrow and you have a chat with the ringmaster?" "Why, that would be splendid," said the doctor, "but in the meantime, don't say anything to anyone about the idea at all. We must keep the push-me-pull-you a secret till he is actually put on show before the public." Business arrangements. The next day, Matthew Mugg and the doctor set out for Grimbledon. They found the manager of the circus, Alexander Blossom, counting money at the gate. John Doolittle described the wonderful animal that he had at home and said he wanted to join the circus with him. Alexander Blossom admitted he would like to see the creature and told the doctor to bring him here. But John Doolittle said it would be better and easier if the manager came to Puddleby to look at him. This was agreed upon, and after they had explained to Blossom how to get over to the little house on the Oxenthorpe Road, they set out for home again, very pleased with their success so far. "If you do go with Blossom's circus," Matthew asked as they tramped along the road chewing sardine sandwiches, "will you take me with you, Doctor? I'd come in real handy, taking care of the caravan, feeding and cleaning and the likes of that." "You're very welcome to come, Matthew," said the doctor, "but what about your own business?" "Oh, that," said Matthew, biting viciously into another sandwich. "There ain't no money in that. Besides, it's so tame handing out bits of meat on skewers to overfed poodles. There's no, what do you call it?" He waved his sandwich towards the sky. "No adventure in it. I'm naturally venturesome, reckless-like. Always was, from my cradle up. Now the circus, that's real life. That's a man's job." "But how about your wife?" asked the doctor. "Theodosia? Oh, she'd come along. She's venturesome like me. She could mend the clothes and do odd jobs. What do you think?" "I think that would be fine, Matthew," said the doctor. Late that night, when the Grimbledon Fair had closed, Mr. Blossom, the ringmaster, came to the doctor's house in Puddleby. After he had been shown by the light of a lantern to the push-me-pull-you grazing on the lawn, he came back into the library with the doctor and said, "How much do you want for that animal?" "Oh, no, he's not for sale," said the doctor. "Oh, come now," said the manager, "you don't want him. Anyone could see you're not a regular showman. I'll give you £20 for him." "No," said the doctor. £30, said Blossom. Still the doctor refused. £40, £50, said the manager. Then he went up and up, offering prices that made the cat's meat man who was listening open his eyes wider and wider with wonder. "It's no use," said the doctor at last. "You must either take me with the animal into your circus or leave him where he is. I have promised that I myself will see he is properly treated." "What do you mean?" asked the showman. "Ain't he your property? Who did you promise?" "He's his own property," said the doctor. "He came here to oblige me. It was to himself, the push-me-pull-you, that I gave my promise." "What, are you crazy?" asked the showman. Matthew Mugg was going to explain to Blossom that the doctor could speak animals' language, but John Dolittle motioned to him to be silent. "And so, you see," he went on, "you must either take me and the animal, or neither." Well, the upshot of it was that the showman finally consented to all the doctor asked. Push-Me-Pull-You and his party were to be provided with a new wagon all to themselves, and although travelling as part of the circus, were to be entirely free and independent. The money made was to be divided equally between the doctor and the manager. Whenever the Push-Me-Pull-You wanted a day off, he was to have it, and whatever kind of food he asked for was to be provided by Blossom. When all the arrangements had been gone into, the man said he would send the caravan here next day and prepared to go. "Have your party ready by 11 in the morning. Good night." "Good night," said the doctor. Circus life. Very early the next morning, Dab had the whole house astir. The diligent housekeeper had the house closed and everybody waiting outside on the front steps hours before the wagon arrived. But the doctor, for one, was still kept busy. For up to the last minute, animal patients were still coming in from all parts of the countryside with various ailments to be cured. At last, Jip, who had been out scouting, came rushing back to the party gathered on the steps. "The wagon's coming," he panted, "all red and yellow. It's just around the bend." Then everyone got excited and began grabbing the parcels. Gub-Gub's luggage was a bundle of turnips, and just as he was hurrying down the steps to the road, the string broke and the round white vegetables went rolling all over the place. The wagon, when it finally came in sight, was certainly a thing of beauty. It was made like a gypsy caravan, with windows and door and chimney. It was very gaily painted and quite new. Not so the horse. He was quite old. The doctor said that never had he seen an animal so worn out and weary. He got into conversation with him and found out that he'd been working in the circus for 35 years. He was very sick of it, he said. His name was Beppo. The doctor decided he would tell Blossom that it was high time Beppo should be pensioned off and allowed to live in peace. When the animals and the baggage were all in, the doctor got terribly afraid that the load would be too much for the old horse to pull, and he wanted to push behind to help, but Beppo said he could manage it all right. However, the doctor would not add to the weight by getting in himself, and when the door was shut and the window curtains drawn so no one should see the Push-Me-Pull-You on the way, they set out for Grimbleton, with the man who had brought the wagon driving and the doctor and the cat's meat man walking behind. They reached the Grimbleton fairgrounds about 2:00 in the afternoon and entered the circus enclosure by a back gate. Inside they found the great Blossom himself waiting to welcome them. He seemed quite surprised on the vans being opened to find the odd collection of creatures the doctor had brought with him. He was particularly astonished at the pig. However, he was so delighted to have the Push-Me-Pull-You that he didn't mind. He'd once led them to what he called their stand, which he said he had built for them that very morning. This the doctor found to be similar to the place where he had first spoken with Blossom. It was a platform raised 3 feet from the ground so that the board and canvas room at the top of it could be seen. It had steps up to it and a little way back from the front edge of the platform. Curtains covered the entrance to the room so no one could see inside unless they paid to go in. Across the front of it was a sign. "The Push-Me-Pull-You. Come and see the marvellous two-headed animal from the jungles of Africa. Admission, 6d." The red and yellow wagon, in which the doctor's party, with the exception of the Push-Me-Pull-You, were to live, was backed behind the stand, and Dab immediately set about making up beds and arranging the inside so it would be homelike. After the Push-Me-Pull-You had been moved to his new home in the stand, and the doctor had seen that he was provided with hay and water and bedding, the Puddleby party started out to make a tour of the circus under the guidance of the great Alexander Blossom, ringmaster. The main show took place only twice a day in a big tent in the middle of the enclosure, but all around this there were smaller tents and stands, most of which you had to pay extra to get into. Of these, the doctor's establishment was now to form one. They contained all manner of wonders: shooting galleries, guessing games, wild men of Borneo, merry-go-rounds, strong men, snake charmers, a menagerie, and many more. Blossom took the doctor and his friends to the menagerie first. It was a dingy, third-rate sort of collection. Most of the animals seemed dirty and unhappy. The doctor was so saddened he was all for having a row with Blossom over it. The cat's meat man whispered in his ear, "Don't be starting trouble right away, Doctor. Wait a while. After the boss sees how valuable you are with performing animals, you'll be able to do what you like with him. If you kick up a shindig now, we'll maybe lose our job. Then you won't be able to do anything." This struck John Doolittle as good advice. He contented himself, for the present, with whispering to the animals through the bars of their cages that later he hoped to do something for them. Just as they had entered, a dirty man was taking around a group of country folk to show them the collection. Stopping before a cage where a small furry animal was imprisoned, the man called out, "And this, ladies and gents, is the famous hurry-gurry from the forests of Patagonia. He hangs from the trees by his tail. Pass on to the next cage." The doctor, followed by Gub-Gub, went over and looked in at the famous hurry-gurry. "Why," said he, "it's nothing but a common opossum from America, one of the marsupials." "How do you know it's a marsupial, Doctor?" asked Gub-Gub. "She hasn't any children with her. Perhaps it's a parsupial." "And this," roared the man, standing before the cage, "is the largest elephant in captivity." "Almost the smallest one I ever saw," murmured the doctor. Then Mr. Blossom suggested they go on to the next show, Princess Fatima, the snake charmer, and he led the way out of the close, evil-smelling menagerie into the open air. As the doctor passed down the line of cages, he hung his head, frowning unhappily. For the various animals, recognising the great John Doolittle, were all making signs to him to stop and talk with them. When they entered the snake charmer's tent, there were no other visitors there for the moment but themselves. On the small stage they beheld the Princess Fatima powdering her large nose and swearing to herself in Cockney. Beside her chair was a big shallow box full of snakes. Matthew Mugg peeped into it, gasped in horror, and then started to run from the tent. "It's all right, Matthew," the doctor called out. "Don't be alarmed, they're quite harmless." "What do you mean, harmless?" snorted the Princess Fatima, glaring at the doctor. "They're king cobras from India, the deadliest snakes living." "They're nothing of the sort," said the doctor. "They're American black snakes, non-poisonous," and he tickled one under the chin. "Leave them snakes alone," yelled Fatima, rising from her chair, "or I'll knock your bloomin' head off." Crossing over to the strongman's booth, Gub-Gub caught sight of the Punch and Judy show which was going on at that moment. The play had just reached that point where Toby the dog bites Mr. Punch on the nose. Gub-Gub was fascinated. They could hardly drag him away from it. Indeed, throughout the whole time they spent with the circus, this was his chief delight. He never missed a single performance, and although the play was always the same and he got to know it every word by heart, he never grew tired of it. At the next booth, a large audience was gathered, and yokels were gasping in wonder as the strong man lifted enormous weights in the air. There was no fake about this show, and John Doolittle, deeply interested, joined in the clapping and the gasping. The strong man was an honest-looking fellow with tremendous muscles. The doctor took a liking to him right away. One of his tricks was to lie on the stage on his back and lift an enormous dumbbell with his feet till his legs were sticking right up in the air. It needed balance as well as strength, because if the dumbbell should fall the wrong way, the man would most certainly be injured. Today, when he had finally brought his legs into an upright position and the crowd was whispering in admiration, suddenly there was a loud crack. One of the boards of the stage had given way. Instantly down came the big dumbbell right across the man's chest. The crowd screamed and Blossom jumped up on the platform. It took 2 men's strength to lift the dumbbell off the strong man's body, but even then he did not arise. He lay motionless, his eyes closed, his face a deathly white. "Get a doctor," Blossom shouted to the cat's meat man. "Hurry! He's hurt himself. Unconscious. A doctor, quick!" But John Doolittle was already on the stage, standing over the ringmaster, who knelt beside the injured man. "Get out of the way and let me examine him," he said quietly. "What can you do? He's hurt bad. Look, his breathing's queer. We got to get a doctor." "I am a doctor," said John Doolittle. "Matthew, run to the van and get my black bag." "You a doctor?" said Blossom, getting up off his knees. "Of course he's a doctor," came a voice out of the crowd. "There were a time when he were the best-known doctor in the West Country. I know un. Dolittle's his name, John Doolittle of Puddleby on the Marsh." The doctor found that 2 of the strong man's ribs had been broken by the dumbbell. However, he prophesied that with so powerful a constitution, the patient should recover quickly. The injured man was put to bed in his own caravan, and until he was well again, the doctor visited him 4 times a day, and Matthew slept in his wagon to nurse him. The strong man, his show name was Hercules, was very thankful to John Doolittle and became greatly attached to him. The next day, the push-me-pull-you was put on show for the first time. He was very popular. A 2-headed animal had never before been seen in a circus, and the people thronged up to pay their money and have a look at him. At first he nearly died of embarrassment and shyness, and he was forever hiding one of his heads under the straw so as not to have to meet the gaze of all those staring eyes. Then the people wouldn't believe he had more than 1 head, so the doctor asked him if he'd be so kind as to keep both of them in view. "You need not look at the people," he said, "but just let them see that you really have 2 heads. You can turn your back on the audience, both ends." But some of the silly people, even when they could see the 2 heads plainly, kept saying that one must be fake. And they would prod the poor timid animal with sticks to see if part of him was stuffed. While 2 country bumpkins were doing this one day, the push-me-pull-you got annoyed, and bringing both his heads up sharply at the same time, he jabbed the 2 inquirers in the legs. Then they knew for sure that he was real and alive all over. But as soon as the cat's meat man could be spared from nursing Hercules, he turned the job over to his wife. The doctor put him on guard inside the stall to see that the animal was not molested by stupid visitors. Poor creature had a terrible time those first days, but when Jip told him how much money was being taken in, he determined to stick it out for John Doolittle's sake. And after a little while, although his opinion of the human race sank very low, he got sort of used to the silly gaping faces of his audiences and gazed back at them, from both his heads, with fearless superiority and the scorn that they deserved. Dr. Doolittle meets Sophie. One night, on a trip between towns, the procession had stopped by the side of the road as usual. There was a nice old-fashioned farm quite near, and Gub-Gub had gone off to see if there were any pigs in the sty. Otherwise, the doctor's family circle was complete. And soon after the kettle had been put on to boil, Jip's 2 friends, Toby the Punch and Judy dog and Swizzle the clown's dog, came to the caravan and joined the doctor's family. The night was cool, so instead of making a fire outside, Dab-Dab was using the stove in the caravan, and everyone was sitting around it chatting. "Have you heard the news, Doctor?" said Toby, jumping up on the bed. "No," said John Doolittle. "What is it?" "At the next town, Ashby, you know, quite a large place, we're to pick up Sophie." "Who in the world is Sophie?" asked the doctor, getting out his slippers from behind the stove. "She left us before you joined," said Swizzle. "Sophie's the performing seal. Balances balls on her nose and does tricks in the water. She fell sick and Blossom had to leave her behind about a month ago. She's all right now, though, and her keeper is meeting us at Ashby so she can join us again. She's rather a sentimental sort of girl, is Sophie, but she's a good sport, and I'm sure you'll like her." The circus reached the town of Ashby at 9 o'clock the next morning. After the tents were all rigged and everything in readiness for the afternoon performance, Dr. Doolittle set out to make the acquaintance of the performing seal. Sophie, a 5-foot Alaskan seal with sleek skin and intelligent eyes, was one of the features of the big tent twice a day. During the rest of the time, she was kept in a tank which was let into the ground. Visitors could watch her dive for fish for their amusement if they paid 3p to come and see her. When the doctor arrived at the railing which surrounded the tank, he spoke to her in her own language. She burst into a flood of tears when she realised who the doctor was. "What is the matter?" asked John Doolittle. The seal, still weeping, did not answer. "Calm yourself," said the doctor. "Don't be hysterical. Tell me, are you still sick? I understood you had recovered." "Oh, yes, I got over that," said Sophie through her tears. "It was only an upset stomach. They will feed us this stale fish, you know." "Then what's the matter?" asked the doctor. "Why are you crying?" "I was weeping for joy," said Sophie. "I was just thinking as you came in that the only person in the world who could help me in my trouble was John Doolittle."